Hello, and welcome to our training or our workshop tonight with Amie and Kimberly. This is Mary Katherine with the Neighborhood Alliance. I'm super happy to see all of you here. This is a really interesting, informative, inspiring, and fun workshop. I learned so much last year. I'm excited to hear these subject matter experts speak again. So welcome to our world here. I am going to let Kimberly and Amie introduce themselves. Just I want to note that this training is being recorded. If you have any questions, I will be monitoring the chat and feel free to toss out any questions that you might have. So with that, I will hand it over to you all. Thank you.
All right,
All
Amie.
right. All right. Well, I guess I'll be going first. So, my name is Amie Robison. My company is Robison Wildlife Solutions. I am an aquatic ecologist. I go by the pond lady. So, if you ever hear that tossed around, that would be me. Going to give an overview today over some pond management strategies, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Kim, who's going to follow up with her portion, Watershed Health, and for her company. So if you do have questions for me or for Kim at any time, just put them there in the chat. We do get 2 hours total, so I will try to use as much time as we need. But if there are questions outside of this workshop, just feel free to reach out to either one of us, and I will put my email address there in the chat. I do have a contact slide at the end of my presentation that has my phone number. I generally do prefer to speak on the phone if possible, but I realized that I did not put my email address, so I'll put that there in the chat there at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, make sure I know how to do this. Let's see, we're going to do this window here. Let me go all the way back to the beginning. That would be good. Okay, so, uh-oh. I didn't know it was animated. Very cool. Things I didn't even know about my own presentation. So the title of this short course essentially is The Golf Course Effect and Other Poor Practices in Private Ponds. And the aim of this presentation is to encourage responsible stewardship in landowners and communities using what we call best management practices. So, just as an introduction, what is the golf course effect? So, the golf course effect is a term that we have coined ourselves to indicate a collection of poor or negligent practices that are commonly used on golf course ponds. And these practices result in an unsustainable and unhealthy ecosystem, and unfortunately, these types of practices have really become the standard in management for private ponds and lakes, especially in Oklahoma. But from what I can tell, it's pretty common throughout the United States and possibly other parts of the world. So I will start off by saying that all of the photographs in this presentation, aside from this one, are my own. And this one I felt like was a very good representation of what I'm talking about here. So while this is a very beautiful photograph on the face, I took this from Golf Digest. Obviously, this is not in Oklahoma. You can tell with the big stands of pine trees, and some of the landscaping here is a little bit outside of what I would expect from Oklahoma, but still, on the face of this, looks very beautiful. But as an ecologist, right away, I can notice some things that are a little bit deceiving. And of course, we all know looks can be deceiving. So keep this photograph in mind as we go through the presentation, because while this does look pretty, I'm going to point out why it's not a great way to manage ponds. Okay, so If you think back to that last slide, it's beautiful, it's green, it's lush. This is what it looks like when those same types of management practices are applied to Oklahoma ponds. Not near so pretty. So uh, both of these are mowed to the edge. A lot of times in poor management, vegetation becomes invasive, and it's a little bit hard to tell here because a lot of the vegetation around the shoreline has been eliminated and the aquatic vegetation on the shoreline is not there. But underneath the water, and I'm not sure if you can see actually see my pointer, but this water's very muddy. But even with that turbidity, you can see that there's a lot of vegetation under the water that is not.
Amie,
Yes.
one of the people, stop it. One of the people just commented to me, and I don't know how I missed it. The slides are not advancing on your screen.
Are they not? Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's because you don't have it in the show mode. It's still in the notes mode.
Okay. So let's see. Let me try it again. Let me stop the share. We'll do share screen. I'll just go ahead and do my entire screen and see if that helps. I'm not sure. I don't use Zoom very often, so hopefully we can get this to work. You can see my billion tabs there. Um,
Okay, I think that's gonna work.
okay, well, let's see if it'll advance through. We aren't very far into it. Are
Yes,
you
you.
seeing
Yep,
this one now?
that's
Good deal.
perfect. Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure how to see you guys while I'm doing this. So
Well,
let
we all
me
have our cameras off. Oh, and I just had two new people come in that I'm going to let in.
let me
So,
yeah, because it shows the fills up my whole screen like I'm giving the presentation off of my computer, so I can't really see you guys in the
well,
chat
we have
while
our
I'm.
cameras off. So it's, gosh, darn it, no. It's actually perfect. It actually looks perfect to us.
Okay, well then I won't be able to see your questions till the end, but as soon as we get
Okay.
done, I'll back out and go into chat, and so I'll just run through this, and everybody just jot down your questions in chat or make some notes, and then when we get to that point, we can go back and look at slides if we need to.
Okay. And I will monitor the chat, and I apologize for my dog who's been
That's
quiet
nice.
all
That's nice.
day.
That is understandable. I had to kick all the cats out of our room because I assumed they would start crying, and Jarryd has the baby in the other room, so it's not a big deal.
All right.
But
And welcome to Bo and Donna. I'm glad you've joined us.
Thank
yes,
you.
welcome everybody. So now that you guys can see what I'm looking at here, as I had mentioned, we're looking at a pond that's not necessarily using those best management practices. You see, things are mowed to the edge. There's no aquatic vegetation on the shoreline. There is aquatic vegetation under the water that's quite invasive, pervasive, but you can't see it because the water is very muddy. If you also notice, there's a bunch of animal tracks all around the edge. Um, Not really sure whether those are wildlife tracks or whether those are livestock tracks, but essentially you can see there's also a bunch of debris in the water with these fallen limbs that aren't being removed. So just a whole bunch of different red flags for how this pond is being managed. So, what are the impacts of poor management practices? And what I'm going to overview is what we call pond collapse. And pond collapse can actually have a couple of different meanings. So, one of those is trophic collapse. Essentially, the the biological system in the pond is not functioning correctly. So, some indicators for this are eutrophication. Eutrophication is simply an overload of nutrients, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus, that results in increased green algae blooms. Or if you notice in this photograph, what's even worse is blue-green algae blooms. And so oftentimes in ponds that are mismanaged, poorly managed, or have negligent management practices that are in place, what you end up with oftentimes is a collapse that's symptomatic with this persistent, pervasive, and a large scale blue green algae blooms that often look like spilled paint, pea soup. And those are indicators then of low dissolved oxygen, poor water quality. You have a disrupted microbiome, which is the substrate, the bottom of the pond that has all your good microorganisms, becomes inhospitable to those aerobic bacteria over time. So it decreases the rate that things will break down. So these things become more prevalent in the system because they don't really get digested and used up by the organisms in the pond. Essentially, you just have a sick pond essentially. And so if you see something that looks like this, um, that's definitely a bad sign. It's also something you don't want to get into. You don't want to be around. Often it smells terrible, and you can have fish kill events. You don't want your dogs to get in this. So, while green algae blooms are not directly toxic, green algae does not produce a toxin. It can become problematic because it can rob your pond of oxygen. However, something like this blue green algae does actually have the potential to produce a toxic substance that is harmful to fish, to wildlife, to people. And it's just not a good thing to have. I mean, obviously all of our aquatic systems have it, but when you have a balanced, healthy system, other parts of the whole biological process keep it in check. So that's your symptoms of trophic collapse. Do you have these pervasive blue green algae blooms that last for long periods of time? Another indicator that's a more physical system is the pond itself is collapsing. When you have undermined shorelines, you have erosion, you end up having what you can see here in this photo. Large chunks of the actual shoreline are sloughing off and falling into the water, which not only it decreases your access and decreases the aesthetic benefit. But as you can see, there's a lot of green algae growing here. There's a lot of mud, as you can see, along this edge that's collapsing because anything that falls into the water then breaks up and becomes sediment that causes turbidity. Any of the wave action that's lapping at the banks where you have this undercutting increases the sedimentation and the muddiness of the pond. And then over time, as you have more and more of these shorelines that are collapsing and then turning into accumulation at the bottom, you have reduced capacity to hold water, reduced volume of your pond, which is problematic because a lot of these are built and designed to help prevent flooding. So if you have reduced capacity, then you increase your risk for flooding to your neighborhood and those downstream from you, and it decreases the lifespan of the pond. So a lot of these are designed to have a specific holding capacity for a set number of years. And if you accelerate the rate that sediment is accumulating, then you reduce the overall lifespan of the pond. Not only that, but worst case scenario, obviously shoreline erosion is not a good thing, but if you have erosion that's occurring in significant portions or degrees to your dam, you could eventually have a dam breach or a dam collapse, which is catastrophic. So these are all symptoms of the physical body of the pond that are collapsing due to poor management practices. And we'll go into some of these specifics of what causes this or how to fix it, I mean, but essentially mowing to the edge over and over and over again undermines the root structures of the plants that hold the shoreline in place. That's one thing. Obviously, having plants is going to reduce the rate of collapse, but if you have a buffering with either aquatic or terrestrial plants or both, which is more of what we want, then you can reduce the rate at which your shorelines are going to erode. Um, okay. And then another sort of collapse, obviously, you can see here, just like a dam breach when it comes to wildlife and fish. Seeing something like this is pretty catastrophic. Having a fish kill event or multiple fish kill events is a symptom of a sick pond. You over time can lose a lot of your native species of wildlife. You have reduced biodiversity, so you end up with just a single species or a couple of species of fish and plants, and then you get less wildlife that utilizes these systems, less inverts. And when I say reduced biodiversity, if you have an unhealthy system, the major invert you will get is mosquitoes, mosquito larvae. So when you have more invertebrates, a greater variety of invertebrates, you have a greater potential to have predatory invertebrates like dragonflies that will eat aquatic mosquito larvae. Their larvae eat mosquito larvae. You get a like we talked about the substrate of the pond, the microbiome becomes less hospitable to good bacteria, and it reduces the diversity of the bacteria present in the microbiome. And then all of this sort of collectively leads to an increased vulnerability to pollution, to the effects of pollution. And I like to mention that in Oklahoma, the number one pollutant to our waters is actually sediment. So you can see here, not only do we have a fish kill, they're mowing to the edge, you have some bank issues, there's trash in the pond, it's very muddy. But in addition to sediment, then of course, nutrients are a big pollutant. Chemical pollutants are going to be able to enter the pond more effectively, so to speak, if you have a lot of these practices in place. So, like I mentioned, poor water quality, they can smell bad. You have undermined banks, muddiness, decreased holding capacity, increased green and blue green algae blooms. And all of this leads to a pond that doesn't look very good, and a pond that doesn't look very good is actually going to detract from your property value. So that's super important. All right. So now that we've sort of given a brief view of what some poor practices are, some things that we do not recommend, I would like to give a rundown of some of our best management practices. These are also referred to as BMPs, and these are a collection of practices that are used to prevent or reduce pollution. And so, some of the goals of using best management practices, obviously, we want to reduce or prevent pollution. We want to improve our water quality. We want to enhance biodiversity, improve ecosystem and watershed health, provide habitat for wildlife, support recreational activities, and then, of course, improve your aesthetics and property value. And one of the things that is important to note, in addition to the property value, is that best management practices actually reduce management costs over time. So, a lot of these poor practices that we mentioned, whether it's overuse of chemicals or the landscaping to the edge or having to deal with shorelines that are collapsing. And what do you do when you have pieces of the shoreline that are no longer present? All of these things cost money to fix. and are more costly to maintain if worse comes to worse and you have these catastrophic sort of failures of the pond. So, what are some of these best management practices? Well, let's talk about water quality management. Okay. So, one of the things that you can do, and this may not be something that you even do yourself or as a neighborhood, but something I recommend all of my clients do at least once a year is to do if they do not have water quality meters that they can test some of this stuff themselves, to use a certified lab. Specifically, we use the Department of Environmental Quality to monitor your water quality parameters like pH, alkalinity, temperature, oxygen, and nutrient levels like the nitrogen and phosphorus that we had mentioned. If there's ever an issue, it's always super important to have these water quality tests that are done with a certified lab so that you have some protection. If there was some kind of a spill or a neighboring community, their pond dam collapses and floods your pond or introduces contaminants or sediment into your pond, having these tests can provide a baseline that you can say, hey, there was disruption. This is caused by someone else. And we have these tests to prove that this pond was not in this state before an X event happened. So that's something I recommend at least once a year. Water quality tests be done with a certified lab so that those results will be on file. Keep a file for yourself. I always recommend that landowners or neighborhoods keep a pond notebook that you can keep all of these water quality tests or photographs, stocking reports, or plans of action, chemical application reports, anything that pertains to the management of the pond in one place that can be passed along as HOA boards change hands or landowners change hands, because it can be very hard to go back and determine what has been done to a pond over time. So, a little bit off topic there, but in terms of water quality, one of the best things you can do is to circulate your pond. So, a lot of problems that occur with things like algae blooms or blue green algae blooms are a result of having very little movement of the water, keeping the water constantly mixing. Eliminating stratification and stagnation is extremely important. So, if your budget allows for it, while it may be expensive up front, one of the best things you can do is install a bottom up diffused aeration system. So these are like bubblers, not fountains. We do not recommend fountains for a management tool. If you want a fountain for aesthetics, that's great, but it is not going to provide the management that we want. That being said, the aeration systems are, like I said, expensive up front, but long term can reduce your costs and provide significant improvement to your water quality. A huge part of water quality management is to manage the nutrients that enter the pond. So, one of the biggest things we are up against as a collective society is the overuse of fertilizer on lawns. And the runoff of fertilizer into ponds is a huge source of nutrients that cause all kinds of issues, specifically the green and blue green algae blooms that everyone's always trying to treat with chemicals are often caused by chemicals. The liquid fertilizers are a huge problem. You also want to control aquatic vegetation. So, the accumulation of aquatic vegetation over time that is not reduced to a level that is going to provide benefit but not overload is super important, because dead aquatic vegetation turns into fertilizer for the next round of aquatic vegetation and increases the rate of accumulation at the bottom of the pond. So, There is a little bit of overlap in what I'm going to mention for these. And obviously, I realize this is a lot of information to throw at people all at once, but it's approachable in terms of being able to see the effects of a lot of this stuff. So, like I said, if there are questions, we'll go into it. But while it's important to control certain aspects, you never want to overuse chemicals. I'm a huge proponent for natural management, and chemical use is often problematic, especially in the Oklahoma City area. We see service providers that almost exclusively apply chemicals to manage problems and then get uh, landowners into a cycle of applying chemicals every single month to control issues like algae. And that is not recommended. It's not sustainable and it's not ecologically conscious. It definitely causes long term effects, especially because one of the main chemicals that's used often to control algae is copper sulfate. And that's a heavy metal. It is toxic. It's toxic to people, it's toxic to fish, it's toxic to wildlife. It is toxic to green algae, which is why it's used, but it is overused to the point of causing some of the problems. Specifically, the blue green algae is what we see when that chemical is used over and over. Um, and it's just not necessary to use those chemicals that often. If you're having to use them that often, then you're not addressing the underlying issues that are causing the chemical to be recommended in the first place. So if you have service providers that approach you with that kind of a methodology of just coming in once a month and spraying copper, then I would use caution, step away. It's not sustainable. So a little bit of soapbox there for you. One of the other things that is super important when you want to reduce the nutrients that enter a pond, as we said earlier, that mowing to the edge reduces the vegetation around the pond. It reduces the ability of the plants that surround the pond to filter nutrients before they have a chance to enter the pond. So we do not recommend mowing to the edge. Obviously, you can leave some access points, and not mowing is not the same as not manicuring. Obviously, you can have a very nice looking unmowed buffer that's still manicured, but if you mow over and over, it undermines that root structure of those plants. It reduces the ability for the plants to provide that nutrient filtration. It also undermines your shoreline, like we had mentioned earlier. Another thing that is super important is to, if possible, if other techniques aren't working, you're still having a lot of trouble with algae, even with aeration. Sometimes there can just be so many nutrients that your body of water can't cycle them quickly enough. So, something that you can look into is nutrient sequestration techniques. One of the things that we use is biochar. So, it's sort of like a charcoal filter for an aquarium. It's activated carbon that pulls nutrients out of the water, making them less available to algae and blue green algae. And then another big factor is biological control for water quality management. So we had mentioned microbiome effects in pond collapse. You have a disrupted microbiome. So, getting good bacteria into your pond is super important. Probiotics are just as important for ponds as they are for people. So, we recommend probiotics for almost all of our landowners, especially urban landowners that receive a lot of nutrients from fertilizer runoff on an ongoing basis. You can have a really healthy system and still have these periodic pulses of nutrients that enter during rain events. So, to help control those spikes, especially in phosphorus, probiotics can help a lot. Also, fish like tilapia and, of course, grass carp for some reason get a bad name, but as long as you're buying them in Oklahoma, they're going to be certified as sterile. Stocking them at the right densities can definitely help either the tilapia or the grass carp can help with controlling algae, aquatic vegetation, muck, and detritus in your pond. Okay, so like I said, there is going to be a little bit of overlap between these different slides, but let's go on to managing the habitat. So we had talked about this buffer around the pond. So this pond in this photograph had been mowed to the edge for years and years, had been experiencing some pretty significant algae blooms to the point to where it was just an algae pit essentially. So we got them to the point to where they were not mowing to the edge anymore. And obviously you can see this strip right along the edge and the sort of the top of the photograph there where the grass is much greener and thicker. So obviously you can tell where that's having an effect of that reduced mowing right there does provide nutrient filtration, and you can see some dandelions in there. There's a couple other wildflowers in there, which I personally like uh, wildflowers of all kinds, including dandelions. But then you can also see where we have installed some aquatic vegetation around this drain structure so that it helps to filter as water enters this pond. And there's a couple of different species there, but those beautiful purple flowers, that's pickerel weed. The smaller shield shaped leaves are pennywort, and then the vegetation that's growing along the surface of the pond around that cluster is called creeping water primrose, which produces a really beautiful yellow flower. So these pickerel weed we've noticed are really great attractors for pollinators, and monarchs love them. So not only does it provide a benefit for your pond itself, but also for the wildlife. We want
Amy,
everybody.
could you spell pickerel, please? I'm gonna put it
Uh,
in the
I'll,
chat.
I'll I'll go ahead and do that as soon as we get
Okay,
done. I'll put a couple of these species in there for everybody. And
great.
if you'd like, I can also make this presentation available to you guys as a um, just a reference. Obviously, a lot of this stuff I'm just speaking about, so it's not written out, but I'll definitely provide you guys a list of some of these vegetation types that we like.
Excellent.
Um,
Thank you.
and you're very welcome. And then, obviously, when you do stop mowing to the edge, you do reduce the erosion potential. You also help to increase the filtration potential. But other ways that you can protect your shoreline if they are starting to have issues, plants can do a lot. But if it's too severe, you may need to install riprap or even shore socks, which is a pretty large scale undertaking. But if you have a very severe problem, you might need to install or implement some of these bigger scale shoreline protection measures. One of the biggest things that I didn't really know about till I started doing this for private landers is just what a huge problem beavers are, and muskrats are a pretty big problem too, because beavers obviously will reduce your trees and can cause some increased flooding risks if they start building dams where we don't want them. But muskrats will actually burrow, whereas beavers will create a den that's sort of, I mean, you can have some shoreline issues from their burrowing in certain spots, but muskrats tend to create much more extensive burrows underground with less of a lodge type look. And we've had one pond that I can think of where, I mean, it was just a hazard to walk, and you couldn't really see where these burrows were, but they had undermined large portions of even 20-30 feet from the water's edge. So as much as it pains me, controlling beavers and muskrats is super important for pond management. So of course, you want to control trash or debris. Any of that kind of stuff can break down and just over time accumulate, and it's just not aesthetically pleasing, obviously. And then, of course, fish and wildlife management. So, and the first thing on there is remove non-native species. This goes for plants and animals. One of the biggest things we run up against in our line of work is the presence of common carp in systems, which are a non native that can become very pervasive. They're prolific spawners and they can become so abundant that they really stir up, muddy up the water. So these are different from your grass carp that we had mentioned as a management tool earlier. Common carp are not sterile, so they do have the propensity to become problematic and take away resources from your fish that you might be trying to grow. We want to make sure that we stock appropriate species for the body of water you have. So that an example of that would be we don't generally like to put flatheads or blue catfish or crappie in very small ponds. They aren't going to do well. They're going to take resources away from other species. And the opposite of that is if you have species of interest like bass, you don't want to overstock them. So, one of the things I see often is that a lot of ponds are catch and release fishing only, which I understand has its place. You don't want people to come in and poach all your fish. But if you never have any harvest, or if you overstock too many fish at one time, then you can have too many fish in one space, reduce your growth, which is not necessarily an impediment to the health of a system. It can just definitely cause a lack of enjoyable fishing depending on what you're looking for, I guess. We always encourage native species of fish, wildlife, plants, aquatic and terrestrial. If possible, control sediment. So, of course, reducing your erosion, reducing bank and shoreline undermining, and having your good vegetative buffer helps to control the sediment that enters the pond. If you are interested in the fishing aspect and you want to make sure that your fish are healthy and they're growing well, you want to monitor your fish populations, prevent disease. Of course, having a healthy system is one of the best ways that you can do that. And then, of course, having more heterogeneity to your habitat is super important for not just fishing and healthy fish populations, but for having a healthy system overall. The more different types of habitat that you have in a pond, the better health it's going to have for the most part. Okay, so I know that was a lot, and we'll back off a little bit of the specifics of the types of management strategies that we can use. But I guess, the point of all this is, why do we want to adopt sustainable methods? Why is it important? What benefit does it have aside from the health of the system? So I just want to indicate or point out that the desire for ecosystem health, sustainability and aesthetics are important. For the most part, people want healthy ponds and watersheds. I don't talk to many people that say they want an unhealthy pond. I want my pond to be ugly. I want my pond to be in bad shape. For the most part, healthy systems are just safer. Reducing the use of chemicals, having solid shorelines, having clear water that's not full of blue green algae is just safer. Um, Sustainability is super important. A lot of these methods that lead to bad pond situations are just unsustainable. Not only are they expensive, but they don't really provide any benefit. Biodiversity is supported by healthy systems. As you can see, this is one of those pickerel weed flowers. This is one of my own photographs. This little wetland that we got to take care of is now one of the spaces that will forever stick out in my memory, because as we were in the process of restoring it and getting these beautiful pickerel weed to take over areas of the shoreline where they did not have much purchase before. I remember going out one day and just seeing maybe 150 monarch butterflies all just lazily floating around and utilizing this beautiful flower, and it just struck me as this is what happens when you treat a pond nicely. Um, One of the biggest things I would say that I run up against is the idea that ponds are supposed to have this golf course look, that a healthy pond should be mowed to the edge, that it shouldn't have aquatic vegetation, that it should be dyed blue and treated with chemicals, and there should never be any algae, there should never be any aquatic plants, and that's just not a healthy pond. So uh, teaching people what a search image for a healthy pond would be or should look like is super important. Shifting this perception away from that look to embracing a more wild space is super important, and it's actually kind of difficult because, like I said, there are companies that sort of sell this snake oil idea of, mow to the edge, destroy all your aquatic vegetation, let's kill all the algae every month for years and years, and it's always going to look perfect, and that's just a completely untrue. It's not how nature works. We would always prefer to work with nature instead of against her. um, Obviously, as I mentioned, aesthetically pleasing ponds increase property value. So something that's full of blue green algae is not going to do your neighborhood any good. It's definitely not going to do your property value any good. So, that being said, I know that a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, appreciate wild spaces that look natural.
Okay.
And then, of course, recreational benefit is super important. A lot of people use their neighborhood ponds for whether it's fishing, some people even use them for swimming. I know there's quite a few that I would be a little bit wary of swimming in just because of how they've been treated. But the more healthy a pond is, the better you treat it, then the safer it's going to be for swimming. A lot of people use canoes or kayaks. Some of the bigger impoundments even have motorboats on their lakes, especially, like some of the 20-acre impoundments over by Hefner. A lot of people have their pontoon boats or their bass boats on their lake or pond. Um, Obviously, if you've got a lot of algae and submerged vegetation, then you reduce your boating access. And then, of course, if you're anything like me, overall, I just like to be around water. Being around water and being around nature is soothing. It's good to step away and get off the technology and just sit with Mother Nature. Um, and then, of course, if none of that does it for you, then reduced management cost is a huge benefit. Degraded ponds are expensive. Chemicals are expensive. If your shoreline or your dam collapses and you have to rebuild, that's hugely expensive. Dredging, if your pond gets to such a bad condition that your only option is to drain it and dredge it, you can take a management cost from a couple $1,000s to tens of thousands of dollars very quickly. Um, Obviously, fish are expensive. If you have fish kill events, you have to replace those fish. That's not cheap. So, if you can avoid doing that, it is going to be better for your wallet. And now there are some parts of this management strategy, these management strategies that can be expensive up front, like the aeration system, but well maintained over time, then you greatly reduce the annual cost that's associated with management. And so if you break it into an annual cost, then long term, you're actually going to be saving money. So all of that being said, if there's anything that you take away from this and sort of keep handy, might be this slide. I just sort of outlined some very brief general rules upon management. I'll just run through these real quickly and then we'll be ready for some questions. I know I'm running out of time. I can talk about this, if you can't tell, for a very long time. So I have found that that's as much of the work that I do as the actual work that I do is talking to people about this. Teaching is one of my passions. Creating stewards from my landowners is part of my mission. If I can teach people how to do this themselves, then not only are they going to be more empowered and care more about the waters in their neighborhood, but that care and that understanding will spread throughout the landscape of pond owners in Oklahoma. And I hope the practices that get spread will be these best management practices. So, like I said, don't commit to monthly chemical treatments. It's harmful to the environment, it's harmful to your budget. Do not feed wildlife. Do not feed ducks. Do not feed geese. Do not feed the fish. Do not feed the squirrels. Do not feed the raccoons. In general, that's just a general rule, not just a pond management, but being a good steward. Keep your pond and waterway free of trash and debris, including grass clippings if possible. Don't put animal waste in the ponds. Don't dump your wastewater, vehicle fluids, herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers into the water. If possible, you use organic fertilizers instead of liquid fertilizers. Do not mow to the edge of the pond or the creek. Leave aquatic vegetation along the shoreline. If you can, adopt a monthly probiotics regime, specifically March through October during the active growing season. Monitor your dam or waterway banks for holes, erosion, or other damage. If possible, install diffused bottom up aeration, not fountains. Keep your dams, spillways, stormwater drains, and overflow areas free of trash, debris, and other obstructions. Restore natural flow if possible. And then budget. Long term management can be expensive, especially if a pond has been treated poorly or never managed. A good ballpark is about $1,000 per acre per year. Even if you don't spend it all, if you ever end up having to spend that money, you've got it set aside. So, and that number is really based on how things used to be. Now, with how things are going in our economy, you might need to set aside a little more, but that's a good ballpark per acre per year is about $1,000. So, there's our information. We're Robison Wildlife Solutions. I'm an aquatic ecologist. My husband's my business partner. His name's Jarryd Robison. He's a wildlife biologist. He also does nuisance wildlife control. So if you do have beavers or muskrats that are causing problems, we can help you with that. And with that being said, I will now take any questions. Let me go back to the chat here so I know what's going on. I'll stop sharing my screen. Where's our chat? Okay. Do I still have everybody?
You do.
Okay, good. Oh, OU duck pond, ways to improve it. Okay, so there's a couple of questions. OU duck pond, that is one I don't know about, but a lot of the methods that I'm talking about, if it's having problems, can help. If that's something specifically that I need to come look at, I would be more than happy to. Or if you want to give me a call, I can look at it on the map and we can try to game plan some ideas to make it better. As far as the mosquito dunks are concerned, the question was, do mosquito dunks interfere with dragonflies? I don't think that they do, but we generally don't use mosquito dunks for pond management purposes because the amounts that you would need to actually have an effect probably would be fairly expensive. And really, the best management practices that we outlined are going to be more effective for maintaining a good diversity of inverts that can control the mosquitoes without having to use the mosquito dunks. So I would prefer to see more aquatic vegetation rather than depending on something like mosquito dunks to help control mosquito larvae. And Susan, thank you. I think it's very interesting too. This is my passion. I've been studying and managing aquatic ecosystems for over 20 years now. I do have a master's in zoology, but my master's research was in ecotoxicology, essentially how um, aquatic organisms are affected by toxins. So that's just another reason why I'm just not a huge fan of chemicals. So if we can reduce the use of chemicals and improve the health of the ecosystem, then I feel like that's a win for everyone. So if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to go ahead and put my phone number here again and my email address in the chat for anybody that wants it. And then
This
I
has
will
been
make sure.
fascinating. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'll also make sure that Mary has access to this presentation if you'd like it. And if you don't want to type a question in the chat, does anybody have one they'd like to ask? I know there's not a lot of us, but if there's anybody else that you guys and talk to that are interested in getting in touch with me, just feel free to give me a call. I'm more than happy to cuss and discuss all types of situations. So
Thank you.
you are very welcome.
So next up, we have Kimberly Elkin.
All right, awesome. Hold on. Can you guys see that? I don't know why it's advancing. Hold on. What is going on here? There we go. You guys can see that?
I see it.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening, 2 weeks before Earth Day. And just so you know, Earth Day is my birthday. So I think I was born to work on environmental issues, and I chose aquatics. And like Amie, I'm an aquatic ecologist. And so today I'm going to talk about ecosystem services for watersheds. And just in its simplest form, ecosystem services are the benefits that nature provides. I started my own environmental consulting. So I have Watershed Life Consulting. And then I also have a nonprofit called the Watershed Movement, where we put about one project a year on the ground. We're getting ready to do one in the next couple of weeks. We'll talk a little bit about some of those types of projects as we move through this presentation. But one thing I wanted to talk about, and Amie already kind of touched on it, is when you look at this pond, like, what do you see? What do you think their main issue is in this pond? And you can put it in the chat, you can say it out loud. But what do you think is one of the main issues that's going on in this pond? So for this one, sedimentation is a huge issue. They're spending a lot of money and time trying to control sediment from entering the stream. And just like Amie mentioned in her presentation, you can see that people mow all the way to the edge. So that's something that we are trying to encourage people to do, to have a vegetative buffer around that pond to kind of slow that erosion down, you know, especially during stormwater events. And I know there were some places across Oklahoma recently that got a lot of rain. I'm actually in Ada, and we got close to 4 inches of rain. And it's amazing the things that wash into our bodies of water. And that's just one of them, like Amie mentioned, sediment being the #1 pollutant here in Oklahoma. So as far as ecosystem services, this is how it's broken down into these 4 areas: the provisioning, the regulating, the cultural, and the supporting. And like I said, ecosystem services are the benefits nature provides, or in this graphic, it's basically what nature provides us for free. So we're really encouraging people to utilize nature as much as possible. And when you think about provisioning services, you think about clean water, think about fish, wood, pollination. I know Pollinators is a big thing, especially here in Oklahoma, as we have the monarchs that go through Oklahoma. And Amie talked about that, having that wetland that had a lot of monarchs there. So that's really cool. Regulating services. So think about a forest, like it's providing cooler temperatures. And I know particularly in urban environments, a lot of people talk about the urban heat island effect, and they're trying to figure out ways to put more trees in cities, you know, to counteract all the pavement that's there. So just think about it from that standpoint. It's, you know, having those cooler temperatures is going to regulate things, especially when it comes to our hot summers that we have here in Oklahoma. Controlling flooding, purifying water, and then storing carbon. You know, that's one thing we hear a lot about with climate change and things that are going on. A lot of carbon is being released as we develop our landscapes more and more. And so really trying to encourage people to adopt like these best management practices where we could keep carbon in the ground. You know, something as simple as don't till your garden. I know that that's a hard thing to do because weeds are a hard thing to control, but you know, that's one way to kind of keep carbon in the ground as well. And then also clean air, you know, that regulating service that we all like. And we all know, especially in the summertime, we have a lot of issues with ozone and things that are going on in Oklahoma and the air and the particulates in the environment that can affect those regulating services. And then the cultural part of it. So your stewardship, you know, what you do in the parks, whether it's in an urban environment or in areas, in rural areas, the aesthetics that it brings us, you know, just actually being out in nature and what it does for us as individuals, the recreation part, and then obviously the education. And then the other part of it is the supporting. So the biological diversity that we see, the different types of habitats, how soil is formed and food. So that kind of all makes up that ecosystem service, the benefits that nature provides us. And obviously a lot of those things we as humans take for granted on a daily basis. And so when you think about that, think about stormwater, think about it in some of the areas in Oklahoma City and in Norman, like wherever that stormwater flows, everything is going to go, right? So those pesticides, those herbicides, those fertilizers, all those things Amie talked about, you know, eventually that's going to end up in a body of water, whether that's a pond, a lake, a river, a stream, whatever it happens to be, any trash, everything is going to end up in the water. And so, you know, trying to find ways, whether that's through these vegetative buffers, where we can slow down some of the storm water, let those plants filter those pollutants, is going to be, you know, one aspect of a best management practice that we can put on the ground. And so I like to show this graphic because this shows you what we refer to as green infrastructure. And you can see, you know, the conservation areas, forested lands, in parks and urban areas, that urban tree canopy that we like to keep. Rain barrels, that's a big thing for people that want to go water their plants and capture whatever water is available when we have precipitation events. Green roofs is a big thing. I actually saw an article recently in Switzerland. They're really trying to step up their efforts with green roofs, getting people to kind of have that connection, even though they live in an urban environment, but to have like a green roof that's going to help regulate things, especially in the summertime, creating cooler costs for individuals and reducing your electric bill. And plus, you know, you live in a city, you can look out and you see this green roof and you're like, oh, that's really awesome. You know, whether you're wanting to grow vegetables or you want to have pollinator plants, it's just a great thing to have, particularly in an urban environment. And then rain gardens, which we'll touch on here in a bit. I kind of use rain gardens and pollinator gardens interchangeably. I know that OU does a lot with their stormwater program that they have there at the university, where they talk about rain gardens and like where you kind of build a depression where you might have like a lot of issues with stormwater runoff, let's say near a parking lot or whatever, and then you can capture that stormwater using native plants to filter that. Those are good things to have. Permeable pavement, you know, really being able to allow the water to infiltrate through that pervious surface versus what like a lot of our roads are. Whenever you pay attention in like stormwater events, you just see these massive water just shutting off and going into the storm drain and running into bodies of water. I know they've been trying to make improvements in this permeable pavement because of the weight restrictions of it. So a lot of roads might not be able to have it, but you could have it in parks, places where people walk. Stormwater curb extensions that can help slow down the water, and you see the vegetation that's there in that graphic. And then we have tree planter boxes, and then grow zones. A lot of people refer to them as bioswales or vegetative swales. Some people use rain gardens kind of interchangeably with that bioswale and vegetative swale. So these are a lot of green infrastructure, best management practices that we can get on the ground to help with ecosystem services. So some of the projects that we've worked on over the last few years, like I said, we do about one project a year. And here we put in 10 pollinator gardens at Pauls Valley Municipal Golf Course. It was nice because there was a golf course manager who was very open to new ideas and making his golf course look better. And so we identified some areas where we could put in native plants. We used Johnston Seed Company in Enid. A lot of you may have heard of the Okies for Monarchs brand. And so it's just a mix of wildflower seed that you can put out that's native to your specific area of the state. And then we also utilize Wild Things Nursery, which is in Seminole, to put in some native plants in the ground as well. And one thing I always like to tell people is be very patient, because that first year is not going to be the greatest in terms of growth and the pretty flowers, but by the third year, it's really good. And so really emphasizing patience to people can be a challenge, especially in this society where everything's so fast paced. But in the end, you know, give it time, it's going to have its rewards. And so these are some of the native plants that we got from Seminole Wild Things Nursery. And so you can go through the list that they provide, and you can pick out the plants that you like as far as, you know, what you would like to see in the garden. You know, we have a lot of grasses that we put in. We put in some different types of milkweed. I think that we had maybe like 15 different types of plants that went into these gardens. So you know, the unfortunate part about putting these plants and seeds in is it's very expensive. It can be the most expensive part of the project, but I just think about it for the long-term benefit and gain in creating that pollinator habitat and being able to see those different species that, like monarchs, that utilize these plants over the years. And so this is what one looks like at the golf course. I think this is our third, it might be going on our fourth year of growth. And so you can see a lot of Indian blanket within there, which is the state wildflower. And what was nice with this project is we created like a plant guide and put it in the clubhouse. So people were, if they were like, oh, what is this plant? Then they could go in and they could see the photo, and then they could kind of match it up with the plant that they saw when they were out and about on the golf course that day. And then this is a project we did at a private residence where we put in this rain garden / pollinator garden. And what was really cool about this project is we worked with the Girl Scouts. Amie was part of this, as well as Jarryd. This was a few years ago. We had a private landowner that was willing to work with us because they had some stormwater issues on their land. And then as it leaving their property, as it headed down, it went to a headwater stream that had some good biological diversity. So we tied that in, like, to saying, here, we're putting this in on the ground, and then we're going to take you to the stream so that you can see the types of critters that live here. And so that's what we did here with everyone, with the Girl Scouts. So we did some water quality measurements, we looked at the macroinvertebrates, and we tied that all back into that land-water connection, right? Like, what we do on the land directly impacts our water bodies. And so people could really understand that connection as well. And so you can see here, we're just sampling some critters with dip nets, little D-frame dip nets. And then we were able to bring some of those species out and have them look at them in a pan. And then we did some water quality. Here we're doing some dissolved oxygen measurements. And so just really looking at, what the stream has in terms of the critters that are there and what the water quality is like, and what are some practices that landowners that live within this area near the stream could do on their own property to help that stream. So everyone got to see that connection, which was really cool for us. And then we've been working with homeowners associations. This is actually in South Carolina, just over the border from Charlotte. This is just the first year of putting the seed in and the plants, but we found some native seed and plants to that area. There's a company called Joyful Butterfly, and I think if you go on that website, you can pick your state and they will give you the plants for that state. So it's not just specifically for South Carolina. You can get seeds and plants for your area in your state as well. And so this is a good thing because it's in an urban environment. People ask a lot of questions. They're like, oh, what's a pollinator garden? What does this do? And then having that conversation about what pollinators do for us is a win, because people then understand that connection, right? It brings them back to the ecosystem service and what benefits nature can provide us when we can do projects like this on the ground. And then we've also tied it into working with high school students, giving them a presentation, talking about watersheds. What is a watershed? How do we, have healthy streams, healthy bodies of water, and then tying that into water quality and doing these experiments in the lab. People can see, what impacts are going on in the water bodies around them. And, it's something that we as a nonprofit and as a consulting firm really want to, give people as much information as possible to make these decisions that will improve the landscape and therefore improve watershed health. And so we take that a step further, and we've been doing some water camps. This is actually Blue River, which is just south of Ada. We did this one in October where we got people out in the river, and it's amazing because a lot of people have never even stepped foot in a river, and there are people who live in this area that have never even heard of the Blue River. And so getting people in the water, having them look at those macroinvertebrates, tying that into water quality, having the conversation, like you see that picture there of us on the left-hand side where you've got a good vegetative buffer. What does that mean for the health of this water body? And what can I do as a landowner to improve the water quality in this river? And so I find that people are very fascinated. We're actually going to do this again in May. And so I'm looking forward to just having this conversation with people, letting them know the biological diversity that exists in a lot of places throughout Oklahoma. And it just gets them excited and thinking about, well, what could I do on my own property? Or what could I do to improve this area? So that's always exciting for me. And obviously the river experience, right? Like if you get to be with somebody, so like I've been doing this for over 20 years. And so I probably take for granted that I can go out and do these things. I've been doing it for a long time. But then when you get someone who's never experienced something like this, like it's really cool. Like it really opens up their eyes, to the world around them, to those ecosystem services. And I think in the end, it's going to make us all better stewards of our land and water resources, which is ultimately, the goal for me with starting my own consulting firm and nonprofit, is giving people those experiences and having them understand that everything is interconnected. And so this is always cool, right? So you could show them this picture of the river, and then you could go in there and you could sample those species that are in there and be like, hey, this is a species of crayfish that exists here. And people are just, I don't know, it's just really cool to see the look on people's faces, to understand that you could look at a body of water and then you could go in there and show them the different types of critters that exist there. So that's always exciting for me. And then some of the things I kind of want to wrap up with is this talk about what we refer to as a riparian buffer. So when you see this graphic, you see the trees and the vegetation right along the water body. And so I know there are specific rules within homeowners associations and cities about the width of the vegetation, right? That you could have, some places that I've worked in, like some will allow 50 feet from the water's edge back to have trees and vegetation, right? So the bigger vegetative buffer you can have, the better. But obviously check with like what the local regulations are about what they allow for that. And so that's really going to help with trapping those fertilizers, trapping those chemicals, keeping that sediment in place on the bank through those root systems that exist there. And obviously, we've talked a lot about not mowing to the edge. So really encouraging almost like a nice filtration system for whatever is going to come off that land, like from those uplands down into those water bodies. It's going to be able to filter that water better and make that water quality better. And so we always like to emphasize protecting streamside buffers. You can see in this picture, there's been a lot of stuff going on along the stream. So where you see that vegetation along there, there's a stream, there's a water body on the other side of that, but you can see a lot of the sediment. So a big storm event happens, it's going to end up in the stream. And so that can harm the physical, the ecological integrity of everything that's going on in the water. And so why is it important, right? We've talked about it filters that excess sediment, organic material, nutrients, chemicals. It's going to reduce stormwater runoff, provide flood protection, going to protect your channel bank, right, from erosion, provide shade, which we all would love to have, especially in the summers here in Oklahoma. It's going to help improve that dissolved oxygen, which is going to help those species that are in the water, the fish, the macroinvertebrates, and then providing that leaf litter, large woody debris, which is extremely important to aquatic organisms. They use that for their houses, to lay their eggs, all kinds of things. And then just overall improving that stream bank habitat for aquatic organisms. So if there's one thing with this presentation that I could just overemphasize is let's try to maintain and keep vegetative buffers along our water bodies, whether that's a pond, a stream, a river, whatever it is. It's going to help the overall watershed health and provide for those ecosystem services, so having something like this would be ideal, right? You have really good vegetative buffers along this body of water. And that's all I have. This is my contact information. You can email me at either one of those, call, text, check out our website, watershedmovement.org or watershedlifeconsulting.com. And I appreciate everyone's time. And I guess we'll have time for questions.
If people have questions, they are welcome to put them in the chat or unmute yourselves, and cameras are optional, of course, but if you have any questions or comments, I just want to thank both of you for the passion and knowledge that you bring to this. I just think it is just, this is really fascinating to me, and I really appreciate it when people have passion and knowledge and they can make that information understandable to me. And I just want to comment also, I really love both of what you said about the riparian areas. I think that is just a conversation that has to happen so often, because I think people just really love straight edges and they love to mow, and they need to, helping people understand actually sitting back and doing nothing is actually the best approach so many times.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of times it's kind of like what we learned, right, over the generations. We want like our yards and everything to be what we deem to be aesthetically pleasing. But it's just a different way of, envisioning a world where we can allow those ecosystem services to thrive, right? And allow for those aquatic organisms to be part of the whole ecosystem. So
Jennifer mentioned in the chat, it's so much cheaper to throw down wildflower seeds in the late summer, fall instead of buying plants, or collect seeds from wildflowers in meadows, abandoned lots, and in your own yard. And that is accurate. Well, are there any other questions or comments before we let everybody get back to their evenings? I know Amie has a baby that might be waking up that she might need to go tend to or see.
and if there's anything we can provide you, you know, you can look up Wild Things Nursery in Seminole. She has a plant list on her website. And, you know, you can look up Johnston Seed and find out what seeds are specific to your area. So those are the two main ones that we've been using. And then the Joyful Butterfly, like I said, you can go on their website and try to find places for Oklahoma specifically.
You know, I've heard of Johnston Seed, and I don't know how I didn't pick up on the fact that they're located in Enid, but I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, if there are no more questions, I will send this to all of you through your registration. Once we get the video edited and uploaded, and Amie had mentioned making part of her presentation available. And Amie, if you want to email that to me, I can forward it on to the folks that we have registered. And I got messages from 3 people who were not able to be on this evening, but are looking forward to getting the video. So thank you so much for making yourselves available, and your good work will continue.
And I can send you my presentation as well if you want that.
That'd be fabulous. And
Okay.
I actually am going to send both of your names to some folks that are involved with the OU Duck Pond, because I think they need some direction over there.
Okay. Do you know who specifically is working on that?
There is a group, and I can't remember their names now. I'm going to actually have to scroll through Facebook and look it up and see.
Okay. All right. I just didn't know if the OU stormwater crew is involved with that, or.
Friends of the Duck Pond. Okay, Jennifer Robertson just commented, Friends of the Duck Pond. They've had a really quite a struggle, I think, getting OU to attend to that. Move. Maybe you all can influence them.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can definitely try.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. And everybody get out and enjoy the rest of this lovely evening.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. Bye.